Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. My name is Don, and I'm the host of the Life Science Success Podcast. And today I'm joined by Todd and Kim Saxton. And they're going to talk to us a little bit about their book, The Titanic Effect. Welcome, Todd and Kim.
Welcome. Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much. Can you take just a few minutes and tell listeners a little bit about yourselves? Why don't we start with you, Todd?
Okay. I could go way back. I come from New Jersey and got into education by way of consulting and have been teaching and researching in strategy and entrepreneurship for more than 20 years now. So lots of fun opportunities to engage with the community, work with students, and work with the community on startup related activities.
Very good. And Kim?
Yeah, so I actually went to MIT to be a computer scientist, and I discovered the world of business while I was there. And I switched over to marketing. And so I have an undergraduate degree in marketing, an MBA in marketing, and a PhD in marketing. And after consulting, working in pharmaceuticals, I went back to teaching full time. And I've been teaching, I guess it's almost 18 years. So not quite his 2 decades, but close.
Really close. Yeah. So in a couple of years, you get to celebrate an anniversary together. Congratulations. Yeah. So I mean, definitely interesting backgrounds and I think Kim, you've done a lot of work with startups. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started with startups?
Yeah, so when we moved to Indianapolis to teach, Todd was teaching, I was in pharmaceuticals. We just got involved through the university with various organizations in the community that had startups. So we would be advisors or judges at pitch competitions and things like that. So Todd ended up starting I'll never get the name right, but a startup accelerator type thing. And from that, we just started meeting with startups, having breakfast, coffee, talking to them. So now we're an investor in about 20 startups. We've co-founded an health IT firm. And it just seemed to explode.
Very nice. And Todd, so you also co-founded an Indiana chapter of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, SOAP. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about, its purpose?
Yeah, and thanks for the opportunity. SOAP is a great organization, started a number of years ago, now close to 30 chapters around the world, I think 5 or 6 outside the United States. And there was no chapter in Indiana, sadly. But the idea is to bring together not just physicians, despite the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, but really those with an interest in innovating in healthcare. And that could range from a variety of other healthcare professionals, not just physicians, but also the support ecosystem that either helps fund, advise, offer legal advice, accounting, et cetera, to that community. And it was, as you know, very helpful to bring together the parts of a community around events or around learning opportunities to collaborate. And that's been a really fun journey.
Yeah, and if I could add, it was kind of an outgrowth. Kelley started a physician-only MBA. So we were training physicians about how to start ventures, but then they finished. So what was next? And we've been involved with a number of ecosystems. So the Indiana Venture Club, Vision Tech Angel Partners. I was on board of the Startup Ladies. So it was really in our wheelhouse to then think about an ecosystem in life sciences.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because a lot of MDs have asked me that question. Should I go back for an MBA? Should I, is there another, sort of route that I should consider to get more and more business experience, as they continue to grow. So, I mean, it is kind of a common route, it feels like, for, people that have medical experience that want to run a company, to want to go back for that MBA as well?
Yeah, we see, I would say, three categories. The entrepreneur, like you talked about, who wants to start a company, figure out how to get funding, how to launch and scale. But there's also a pretty significant group who don't necessarily want to start, but they want to either fund or advise. So we have an angel investing group associated with that program. And then there's the group who wants the business training, either to be better administrators or to actually push back against, kind of the suits with pencils, if you will, who want to drive how change is happening in healthcare. And these are clinicians who want a seat at the table and want to be able to speak the language of business to counter what they see as some of the potential ramifications of change.
Yeah, interesting. So I mean, because I haven't seen a lot of that journey yet here in Colorado and the individuals that I'm working with, but at the same time, it's not really the focus that I have either. So that's probably a part of the reason as well. So, Kim, I mean, you guys have an interesting picture behind you, as your backdrop, and so maybe for our listeners, we kind of jump a little bit into the book as well. So you co-authored a book called The Titanic Effect. Can you explain a little bit about what that book is about?
Yeah, absolutely. After 10 or 15 years of working with startups, we realized that we were hearing some common patterns and problems. And so they would bring this problem to us and see what we thought. We'd be like, oh, we've heard this before. And so we put together a presentation for a summer conference where we just outlined, some of these big buckets of challenges, let's call them. And then we needed a name for it. And the idea was that a decision seems really simple on the surface, and then you don't realize it constrains you. And so the iceberg idea came in, and there's a concept in software called technical debt, which is, that you have to make trade-offs of choices, which eventually caught up with you. So we thought, well, there's also marketing debt and financial debt and human debt. So we got this term, the debtbergs. And if you think about icebergs, you have to think about the Titanic. So then we started doing research on the Titanic, and we discovered that they made the same mistakes that we were seeing in startups. So that's how we got to the kinds of problems that you don't anticipate that could sink your startup.
So I mean, just one quick aside here. So I've spent a little bit of time researching your book and reading your book, and I've really enjoyed it. I mean, chapter 2 goes strictly into kind of, the Titanic and what exactly, happened and things like that. And like you said, I mean, you guys specifically talk about, the human oceans and, the technical ocean and things like that. And in terms of, places where you might run into trouble. And the one thought that I had was, it seems like there's one opportunity in terms of life science organizations, and that would be a regulatory ocean that they also stumble their way through as well. So for anybody that does pick up a copy of the book, and I would encourage you to do that. It definitely is something that will be an eye opener in terms of common problems. I think that every startup happens to run into. So yeah, I think in terms of just the book and the layout. Congratulations! It's a fabulous read, and so thank you for that. And so, Todd, what are some of the hidden debts, the non-financial obligations or expectations that startups inadvertently accumulate, but can limit their success or cause their failure?
Well, we'll start with one of the most prevalent ones in the human ocean, meaning the people involved. So I'm going to make up 3 names. Let's say Don, Kim, and Todd are sitting around having a beer after a podcast and come up with this idea, and it's
sketch it out on a napkin, of course.
Yeah, there it is. and we'll split it a third, right? Well,
right.
Todd decides to go surfing, so Kim and Don are left doing the hard work. but I got a third of the company, right? It's been allocated, and we're the co-founders. So one of the first, we call it, in the founder debt kind of category, is the premature allocation of equity before you even know who's going to contribute, instead of having a vesting schedule and some milestones. So that is a common mistake that I say particularly first-time entrepreneurs, but we know some very savvy, experienced entrepreneurs are like, I still make that mistake every time. And it's a tough one. Those are really hard conversations to have, but also really important, because those are things that can really drag the ship down later in the journey.
Todd, I forgot about this one. And there's a startup we're working really closely with, and we meet with them every couple of weeks. And like 3 weeks ago, we get to the meeting, and the third person was going to take a back seat because they had something they needed to do. And we looked at each other, and we're like, there it is again.
There it is. Yeah. Well, it's funny that, it's funny that you say that. And it's especially whenever it comes time for, the company to move to a major milestone, they want to IPO, or they're about to get sold. That's a absolute critical time for them as well. And, certainly if the company's split in thirds and they don't agree, I'm sure that can be, one of those major, sort of instances where this one raises its ugly head.
Well, a great example of that, you may be familiar with Cliff Bar, who had a financial partner, and the company was valued at $120 million. He didn't want to sell. He wanted to protect for his employees, their stakeholders, but the co-founder deserved the 50%. So that's the $60 billion debtberg that he had to pay off, which with one Cliff Bar at a time, you can imagine that could take a while.
Yeah, I remember that example from the book as well, that you guys call out that specific one. And it's, it's an important story, I think, to tell. Go ahead, Kim. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I was consulting with another startup fairly recently, and she wanted to hold on to 40%, but she was going to give her two partners each 30%. So that would be fair. And I said, they can outvote you. She had never occurred to her. She's like, oh, but I took it down because they're doing less than I am. I'm like, but is it your money that's funding it? Because you want to hold on to majority.
Right. Yeah. And it's so important that, as you make these decisions, I've interviewed, also lawyers in terms of, where to incorporate and things like that on the podcast. All of these decisions are so critical. And what's funny is it makes sense to outline exactly what it is that you want to do, and then consult some people like yourselves to try and figure out, am I making the right decisions, or am I, not, at least so that there's some other, thought process, in terms of exactly how to carry this forward as well.
Yeah. And Todd has a great way of working out a formula for vesting over time. And there are formulas available that you can find in popular press. But that's the big thing, is don't do it all at the start. Like, being at the start gets you something, but it's just an idea. It's not a company.
Yeah. So, Kim, what are some of the best product development approaches for limiting technical debt?
Yeah, so that's a tough one. If we could figure out how to limit technical debt from the start, it would be finding your leprechaun and the bucket of gold at the bottom. But being a marketer, of course, I'm going to say it's all about customer discovery. And we're always amazed at how little customer discovery people do. So someone comes up with an idea, and they think, oh, I can make this really cool thing. And they rush off to make it without finding if anybody needs it. and so that's the number one way to minimize your technical debt, is to talk to people first who are going to use this. What problems do they have? How are they solving that problem? What do they really, really want? And then when you've got something, put it in their hands. Some people hold really tight to their idea because they're afraid to hear bad news. But bad news early is better than bad news late.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I mean, I remember, I think it was Clayton Christensen who first had described the innovator's dilemma, and it just said, hey, look, make sure that you're solving a problem that the world, really needs a solution for. That's kind of the start of the innovator's dilemma, anyway.
Well, one of our colleagues uses oxygen, aspirin, or jewelry. Like, is this a problem that people need to be able to breathe? Is it a problem that makes them feel better? Is it something that just makes them look good? So
that's a great example. Yeah.
Oxygen is better than jewelry, in case you weren't sure.
Yeah, which is why I just got Kim oxygen for Valentine's Day, and she was so appreciative.
I'm sure. There you go.
We were in Breckenridge at the time, so oxygen is really good in Breckenridge.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. It would be. You're really good at that elevation as well as that temperature in the snow as well.
Yeah.
So what are the parallels between decisions startups, make and then those made in launching the Titanic?
Interesting. So I'm going to focus on some of the combination of product and marketing and some of the changes specifically that were made. And you see this in startups, even in larger companies, when there's tension between the sales and marketing team and the engineering team. So just one example, the sales and marketing team and the visionaries behind the Titanic wanted it to be as grand as possible. So they didn't want a one-story dining room. They wanted a two-story dining room. It'd be, really impressive and awesome. Big chandeliers, right? So, well, to do that, they had to drop the floor. To drop the floor, they had to lower the level of the bulkheads, which were part of the protective system to keep water from filling and sinking the ship. Wouldn't be a problem unless you happen to run into an iceberg, in which case all of a sudden the bulkheads were filling much more quickly than expected, which is why the ship broke in half and had those issues. So that coordination across functions is one of the strategy ocean debtbergs that we talk about, that you need coordinated effort between the people who are doing discovery and the people who are developing solutions.
Yeah, and so in terms of where you might see this in a real world example with, so let's just say, a life science company, can you maybe try and provide some sort of an example there?
Oh, there's some low-hanging fruit, so to speak. Let's just say Theranos. What an awesome idea. 200 blood tests across 6 different disciplines out of a drop of blood. We would all love to have innovated that. But who thought it was realistic? Meanwhile, they're actually testing people on equipment that doesn't work. I mean, classic example of sales being way ahead of R&D.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you use that example, given kind of the timing of where you are. And I mean, if I rewind some of the executive meetings that I was in, I remember during that period of time, and there were very stern conversations going on about look, is this company onto something or are they not? And all the engineering teams were going, there's no way to get enough signal from that little bit of blood. There's no possible way to do it. And I remember, one senior executive turning to the rest of the team and just saying, look, you better be right. And, lo and behold, years later, you find out all of the journey that they went through in terms of, kind of twisting things around and focusing more on, kind of the design of the outside of the instrument versus the actual functionality of getting to 200 tests is just shocking, inside of the industry. But I mean, part of it comes down to me too, being able to just call each other out and just say, look, I haven't seen any papers on this. There's no possible way that you're making the technological advances that you are. And, guys, time to call it quits. So.
On the other hand, when you have Henry Kissinger on your board, there aren't a lot of people who are willing to put the foot down and say, this is nonsense.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, I think I've said that though in a previous podcast though, that I also, I guess I would question two things. One, in terms of overall investors, I've read articles that have said, hey, look, none of the big venture capital firms, out in Silicon Valley were actually investing in this thing. I mean, they had, more or less had said, look, we don't see, anything to tell us that we should be investing. And then, secondly, just not seeing that's kind of scientific foundation, would be another sort of, key indicator maybe, that, hey, look, there's something to be looked at regardless of who's on the board that might stop, or not allow them to say, hey, look, here's exactly what's going on and we need a bit more time. And I guess in that case, as you work with different companies, do you also work with them on kind of the tough messages that they might have to communicate as well? Because I mean, I think we've all been in projects where you just had to say, hey, look, we need to take a sidestep for a minute and just make sure that everything is sound before we move forward. Otherwise, we're going to have further problems down the line.
Yeah, so interestingly, we've been working with someone who was dissatisfied with the product they were using in life sciences. And so they innovated it to make it easier to use because they loved the technology. It could deliver something cheaper than the current state of the art. And they were one of the leading edge users of it. And so they wanted to bring this new thing out. But we worked with them. We said, like, step back in the whole market of this particular area. This technology has carved off 10% of the market. You're trying to fix something that's 10% of the market in a two technology market. The current winner is 90%.
Wow.
So what are you going to do that they didn't do that is going to change the adoption of the whole technology? Is this the piece that's holding people back? And instead, we said, what about this other market over here where there's no competing technology, but still a need? It's a little cheaper, but it's a little bigger. And every time you go to talk to them, they're excited to talk to you again.
Yeah,
and at first they were like, no, this is my passion. And we were like, well, is it your passion to make money?
And I know I'm not recalling the facts exactly right, but I seem to recall that PayPal made a similar shift as well. I mean, they seem to have made that sort of pivot, as well. Where I think they thought that they were going to be an online banking, partner or something like that, and then eventually they, became essentially how we all, move money around to people, pretty easily until Venmo and others have come along. So.
Yeah. So I think they started out as a way to change hands for electronic money when you're physically together. And they realized that it was better when you had people who weren't together and needed to change money between hands. And all those people were on eBay selling
right,
things.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it moved from like a PDA to PDA transfer to an over the internet, I don't know you transfer.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I've certainly sent my fair share of money that way. I'm glad they did pivot. So Kim, in terms of, business model alternatives that startups can explore that make them more scalable, what might they be?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people start a business thinking that the way they're going to make money is X. Let's say a subscription box to start with. And then they don't ever really stop to think like, well, what are other ways of generating money? I mean, I could have an online store. I could have membership. I could have brick and mortar stores. I could have other people selling for me. So one of the things we sometimes do with people is think, well, what are other configurations of the way that you could make money with this? There's been a lot of creative ways, right? So we see capital investments get leased, capital investments get rented, right? So it's re-envisioning. Does someone have to write a check for 100,000? That's hard to convince them to do. Can they write a check for $2,000 a month? What does that look like?
Yeah. And so, Todd, what are parallels between decisions startups make and those made launching the Titanic?
Well, one that I like to reference is the choice of investors and how much investors can drive strategy and strategic choices. So, just a few elements of the Titanic. Their history in the 1870s and 80s was really based on speed. And they won what was called the Blue Ribbon competition, crossing the Atlantic in less time. They won that multiple times. But at two different points, they brought in investors that drove major strategic change. In the first case, they were foundering financially. New investor came in and, oh, by the way, you're now going to use the shipyard that my nephew runs, which was a good shipyard, but that's a pretty big change when you're making these ships, right? And then the second, and this comes back to J.P. Morgan of J.P. Morgan Chase fame in the late 1800s, early 1900s, who drove this decision toward luxury away from speed. And in doing so, it was kind of running counter to the DNA of the company. And while I think a lot of entrepreneurs feel like raising that $1 million, getting that investor, then going for venture capital, that's like the badge of honor. You're not a serious entrepreneur until you've done those things. They don't really think about the trade-offs associated with getting any investor money, but particularly the kind of investor that's going to help them beyond just writing a check. You're really looking for a strategic partner, not just a source of dollars. And those were some of the parallels that I think reflect back from the Titanic and decisions that founders make.
So critical. I mean, the one sort of bad behavior that I've seen for some investors, and I don't really understand why this happens, and maybe you've seen it as well, but I've seen some investors come in and say, hey, look, you're a 20-person company today, within the next 2 to 3 quarters you need to grow to a 200-person company. Well, if their sales funnel doesn't grow at that same rate, there's no way that they can sustain it. And so then they wind up in this massive amount of debt with salary and human capital debt that they can't sustain. And then they wind up in this position that if they wanted to, let's say they're at 200, 250 people, and all of a sudden they want to go public, guess what? You're going to have to go do, probably multiple rounds of headcount cuts before you're even ready to get started because you've made a wrong decision. And now you got to go make some tough choices and unfortunately, impact the lives of people. And I don't understand that one. It just baffles me.
Well, I think there's been this spiral of escalation of expectations of returns. And we sometimes refer to it as the swing for the fences, kind of funding model that we don't care if you've never played baseball, just swing for the dang fences. And yeah, 1 in 1,000 or maybe 1 in 100 is going to hit that. But, when we started in angel investing, there were some ratios that you looked for. If it was something that was further along, closer to exit, if you could get 3 to 5x your investment, that was really solid, and you'd hopefully build a portfolio where you had a few of those. And if it was early, more uncertainty, you might look for 5 to 10x. Well, over the last 10 years, those numbers have gone from 5 to 10x to 15x to 20x. And now we hear we don't look at anything unless it's going to be 30x, Well, okay, think about what kind of growth it's going to take in the valuation of a company. How does that translate to sales, et cetera? And you've promulgated this spiral of expectations that is unreasonable, and more importantly, actually forces behavior of growing as fast as possible, hiring a bunch of people, and then missing expectations and letting them go and the company not doing well. So yeah, I share your concern about that.
Yeah. And so, Kim, what are some of the trade-offs and the downsides of using the lean startup approach?
Oh, I got that question. Well, the challenge with the lean startup, there's a lot of things I really love about the lean startup. So, it doesn't have to be perfect to get started. We agree. Get something in people's hands that they can see, touch, and feel, and let you really understand. Oh, by the way, if you want a broken eye, send it to me. I'm really good at that. And this idea of having hypotheses. We love the idea of experimentation, like say outright, what do you think is going to happen? So that you say, if we invest here, we expect to see this kind of return or this type of conversion. That's all really good. But what happens with these experiments in practice that we've seen is what we call the pinball entrepreneurs. So they go over here and talk to this person, and oh, they told us we should do this. So we're going to go over here and talk to that person, and they said do this. Oh, so we got to ricochet back over that way. And eventually you're like, I don't even remember where you started, and I don't know how you got here, but it's not really looking good.
Yeah. Yeah. And I certainly have seen my fair share as well of, just kind of trying to get something out in the market so that people can see it, touch it, feel it, and seeing that as kind of a launch pad for success, from the standpoint of people can at least provide you feedback, but then you have to sort of decide what is your direction at the end of the day. That's part of being a leader is helping to sift through all of that and not just, ricochet around like a ping pong ball, like you said.
Well, and often you're going to be in a marketplace for 5 to 10 years, talking to investors, talking to employees. Everybody's going to pivot. But when you have wild pivots, everybody gets confused.
Yeah.
I mean, we had the algae one, which was going to be a fuel additive. And the next thing we know, it's like flour.
It's a food additive.
It's a food additive. And we're like, which is based in algae. There's like a lot of issues to overcome.
Yeah, I can completely sympathize with that approach. So there are 3 questions that I like to ask every guest, and I'll start with Todd, and then come back to Kim. What inspires you, Todd?
So not just entrepreneurs, but innovators, and we've gravitated toward healthcare as addressing problems that we think are really important and change the quality of people's lives. And while there are a number of marketing SaaS kind of startups in our ecosystem in central Indiana, like selling one more pair of $250 sneakers to somebody that doesn't really need them is a little less inspiring than, like, I don't know, saving lives or something like that. So, but the energy, the enthusiasm, the passion that almost every entrepreneur we work with has for the problem that they're solving is inspiring to me. And I think sometimes the press kind of promulgates this idea of the entrepreneur is either being this like bungee jumping wild whatever, or somebody that's just trying to get rich quick. And at least in my experience, that's a very small percent of the entrepreneurial community. And if we can do something to help them be more successful or to fail less, hit a few less icebergs, and survive the ones that they do hit, that to me is very validating.
Yeah, so the one sort of aside that I would take with your answer as well, that I've asked on the show before of certain guests is, if your treatment doesn't make it through the valley of death, what happens? And the unfortunate story for a lot of them is they truly could die. I mean, the next best cancer therapy or the next best, life-saving therapy for a cardiac patient just might not make it to the end. And so, I agree with you. I think finding that inspiration and helping entrepreneurs along is a lot of fun as well. Kim, what inspires you?
So I agree that the passion that people bring is really inspiring. I want to see people who want to change the world. Not another Me Too. I don't get very excited about that. But when someone sees a real gap and can envision an answer. So in the last year or two, we've become more aware of social justice issues. And so we see some gaps in terms of minority businesses having access to customers and tools and the knowledge of how to access customers. I'm inspired when people want to fix that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kim, why don't we start again with you? So what concerns you?
So my concerns right now are probably more on the socio-political spectrum. I'm really concerned about the polarization that we are creating. We've been doing some research in vaccine hesitancy, and I have just never seen such polar data before between the people who are absolutely convinced it's fantastic and the people who think it's, the mark of death. So I'm worried more broadly about what that means for this country and the spirit of business. Like, it's hard as a business to get your arms around these two polar opposites. We have people even in education who are desperate to be in the classroom, and we have people who don't ever want to be in the classroom again. How do we bring that together to have a cohesive culture and approach that makes everybody comfortable and safe?
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I mean, absolutely true. And Todd, how about you? What concerns you?
I could build more off that theme, but I'll go somewhere else and kind of come back to um, the cult of entrepreneurship, if you will, and the pressure that some people feel to, become an entrepreneur, start a company, what that means, and also the unrealistic expectations of that journey. And not everybody should be an entrepreneur. And there are a lot of other ways to successfully innovate to help change the world. And going out and raising a bunch of money, particularly, is not for everyone. In fact, it's for a relatively small percent. There are lots of other ways to have like a side gig that is self-sustaining. You don't need to raise money around it, but you can pursue your passions and make a difference. And that, to me, is a successful entrepreneur. It has nothing to do with ARR, annual return, or how much money you raise.
Yeah, absolutely. And Todd, what excites you?
Can I add to that just a
Yes,
little bit?
sure,
I'm sorry.
sure.
I'm really good at interrupting. But so we were scratching our heads prior to the pandemic because we were seeing that entrepreneurship rates were on a 30-year slide. And we were saying, like, we see so much popular press about entrepreneurs. Why is this continuing to go down? And now we've seen a shift through the pandemic that entrepreneurship is back on the rise. But it's disturbing what percent of those people are doing it because they have to. It's a survival tactic and not an opportunity tactic. So I think that's going to continue to be an issue. But if you have to create your own business in order to have an income, like, that's great, and do it. Be that solo entrepreneur, be that lifestyle business, run your own world. That's great. Just be okay with that. Don't feel like you have to be the kind that raises money, right? There's different kinds.
Yeah, and it's a tough road, right? I mean, I'm kind of the first, to admit so there's some work that I do with different companies in terms of trying to find, the right funding sources and things like that, and try and, just provide a little bit of direction around that. And what I find so often is, one, I have entrepreneurs who come to me that, don't have, a one pager to explain what their company's about. And they also don't have a pitch deck, but yet they want to meet with investors. And I mean, the first thing I tell them is, look, there's no investor that wants to meet with you. I mean, you could have the greatest thing in the world, and there's nobody that's going to waste their time on you until you've put in the work to go create your pitch deck. So go do that first. Come back. Let's have another conversation about what you have. But then I kind of look at the broader spectrum in terms of investment, and what I see right now is that a lot of companies that have kind of the cutting edge, let's say cancer therapy. So if you have a CAR T cell therapy, if you want to go do CRISPR gene editing, there's investment for you. If you have an artificial intelligence product in software, there's investment for you. For the people that are kind of in between and aren't doing anything with COVID, it's going to be a tough
Yeah.
road. I mean, and I've had people, that have great stories, great drugs that they're working on, but they're working with, an epileptic medicine that they want to get out on the market. And it's going to be a tough place to move forward. And that's what I kind of, continue to see in the market. And it's really unfortunate. And I hope to see things kind of recover on the other side, from an investment perspective, that we'll see things advance, but who knows what happens in the future.
Yeah, that is a challenge. There's always the sexy, ones, and then there's the rest. I mean,
Right.
talk to any women out there, femtech hasn't really been on the horizon too much unless you have a very specific approach. But I don't know if we're going to get that to change, right? As people have bigger and bigger expectations, they love the beauty of AI because of the magnitude and scale of what you can do and charge, which is really different from a pill or some treatment that, a small population requires. But I'd argue an important population.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kim, what excites you?
Oh my gosh, I should have thought about that more. Lately, popcorn excites me, but that's a different story. There's been a lot of innovation in popcorn. Of course, we are from Indiana where there's a lot of corn. But the enthusiasm I see in this next generation, we've talked about the millennials and now we have the Gen Zs. We have been really impressed with some of the Gen Zs that we've been able to work with as students in terms of how some of their values are different. I'm really liking this idea of a circular economy, that once a good is made, it stays and keeps being reused. So some of that really excites me to think about things that I don't normally think about.
Very good. And Todd, what excites you?
Similar, I think an extension of some of our earlier discussion. We're at a time, partly because of COVID, partly because of politics, that people are rethinking a lot about their approach to life. I think, and look at some of the studies about kind of philanthropy, giving back or giving to, it's at a very high level across multiple generations. So baby boomers, more our generation, it's more of a legacy effect, and we've kind of had our careers and, we're now thinking about what's going to happen next. But all the way through down to millennials and other generations, there is much more, I think, social awareness of inequities and a passion for trying to address those. And despite some of the political headwinds that Kim was discussing, that leaves me hopeful, feeling that we have, legions of folks out there that care about what I think are the right things. Everybody won't agree with me, but and are willing to invest to be change agents, and that is inspiring.
Absolutely. So in terms of where people can find out more about you and then find out more about your book, can you tell them a little bit more about, where they can find out more about the Titanic Effect and maybe get in touch with you?
Well, sure. They can go to the website, thetitaniceffect.com, and also the book's on Amazon, but we're also at Indiana University. And so it's pretty easy, T Saxton or MK Saxton at iu.edu. We get emails all the time. Honestly, on Monday, we got an email from the website of somebody who had read the book twice and wanted to see if he could take us to lunch, which was pretty exciting. And we'll do one coffee or lunch for anybody. So there you go.
And if you're in Hawaii, you just have to pay for us to get there.
Definitely. And
There you
we're
go.
there for dinner.
And you'll go, so what I'm hearing is you'll go anywhere tropical, that you have to go, especially for lunch.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll take it on the chin for you.
Well, Todd and Kim Saxton, thanks so much for being a guest on the Life Science Success Podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks,
you.
Don. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, it was great.
Thanks a lot.